The envelope sat on my kitchen table for 3 days before I opened it. White, official looking, with the company logo embossed in the corner. My son, Michael, had left it there the night he came home early, his face gray, his hands shaking as he poured himself a drink he didn't finish. I knew before I read the first line that something inside our family had fractured. What I didn't know was that fixing it would require me to use a phone number I'd kept in my wallet for 30 years, a number I'd sworn I'd never call. My name is Robert Chen, and for most of my life, I'd been the kind of father who believed in letting his children build their own paths. I'm 63 now, retired from a career in telecommunications that took me from poverty in Hong Kong to a modest house in suburban New Jersey. My wife Grace passed away 4 years ago, and since then, my son Michael has been my anchor to the present, the reason I still set an alarm and make more coffee than one person needs. Michael is 31, brilliant with numbers, and probably the kindest person I know. He got his MBA from Rutgers while working full-time, studying at kitchen tables in apartments he could barely afford, eating meals I'd bring him in containers because he'd forget to feed himself. When he landed a job as a financial analyst at Brightwell Capital 3 years ago, I felt something I hadn't felt since Grace died. Pure, uncomplicated pride. The job wasn't glamorous. Mid-sized investment firm, decent salary, long hours. But Michael loved the work, loved the team, loved his boss initially. That was before Harrison Drake took over as managing director. He arrived 20 minutes later with that envelope and a bottle of wine he set on the counter without opening. We sat at the kitchen table where I had helped him with calculus homework 20 years earlier, where Grace had served him countless meals, where we'd celebrated his college acceptance and his MBA graduation and his job offer from Brightwell Capital. The table held the history of our family, and now it was holding another moment, another turning point. Michael didn't speak for a long time. He just sat there, staring at his hands, his jaw tight. I didn't push. I've learned that sometimes silence is the only appropriate response, that rushing to fill quiet spaces with words or questions can shut people down rather than open them up. Finally, he spoke. The presentation went to the board this morning, the acquisition analysis. 6 weeks of work, all the modeling and research and strategy, everything we'd built. He paused, swallowed hard. I wasn't in the room. I felt something cold settle in my chest. What do you mean? Drake presented it himself. He took the entire presentation, put his name on every slide, and presented it to the board as his own work. No mention of me, no mention of the other 2 analysts who worked on it, no acknowledgement of the team at all. Just him standing in front of the board taking credit for 6 weeks of 14-hour days. Michael's voice remained flat, controlled, but I could see his hands shaking on the table. The next 2 weeks were the hardest I'd watched my son endure since his mother died. Michael went to work every day, keeping his head down, doing the diminished tasks assigned to him with the same professionalism he'd brought to the acquisition analysis. He filed expense reports. He formatted other people's presentations. He updated portfolio tracking spreadsheets that required no analysis, no insight, no real thought. He sat in his smaller office, moved from the window spot he'd earned to an interior cube near the copy machines, and watched his former team move forward on projects he'd started. I knew all this because he'd stop by most evenings, not saying much, just sitting at my kitchen table while I cooked meals he'd pick at without tasting. Sometimes he'd help with dinner, chopping vegetables or stirring pots, moving through familiar routines that didn't require conversation. Other times he'd just sit there, staring at nothing, lost in thoughts I could only imagine.
What does that mean exactly, a less demanding role? Michael slid the envelope across the table toward me. It means this. I opened it and read the memo inside. Official letterhead, formal language, Harrison Drake's signature at the bottom in bold ink. Effective immediately, Michael Chen was being reassigned from the strategic acquisitions team to portfolio administration. His responsibilities would now include routine reporting, compliance documentation, and administrative support for senior analysts. No mention of the acquisition project, no explanation beyond organizational restructuring to better align resources with strategic priorities. It wasn't technically a demotion. The memo made that clear, emphasized that Michael's salary would remain unchanged, that this was simply a refocusing of responsibilities to match his skill set. But anyone with corporate experience could read between the lines. This was a demotion in everything but title, a sidelining designed to push Michael out without the legal complications of an actual firing.
Michael's control finally cracked, his voice breaking on the last words. I reached across the table and gripped his shoulder, the way I'd done when he was young and the world seemed too big and frightening. "We'll figure this out," I said. "How? He's the managing director. He has the full support of the senior partners. I'm just an analyst who's easily replaced. If I complain, I look like I'm making excuses for underperforming. If I stay quiet, I accept this new role and watch my career die slowly. Either way, I lose." He wasn't wrong. I'd seen this play out before. The way power insulates people from consequences. The way truth becomes irrelevant when someone controls the narrative. But I'd also seen power confronted, seen careful strategy win against seemingly impossible odds. It required patience, precision, and the willingness to use every resource available. I spent the next 3 days doing something I'm not particularly proud of, but don't regret. Research. I'm retired, which means I have time, and I spent 3 decades in an industry where relationships matter, and information flows through networks most people don't see. Telecommunications might seem unrelated to investment finance, but at certain levels, business is business. The same people sit on multiple boards, attend the same conferences, know the same power brokers. If you've been in the game long enough, you learn how to navigate those networks, how to ask the right questions to the right people. I started making calls, casual conversations with old colleagues, asking questions that seemed unrelated to my son's situation. "Hey, Tom, how's retirement treating you?" "I'm well, thanks. Listen, random question. Whatever happened to that firm, Brightwell Capital? I seem to remember hearing about them a while back." Or, "Sarah, you still doing that financial journalism work? I'm trying to understand the mid-sized investment firm landscape. Any notable players I should know about?" Or, "Richard, we should catch up soon. How's the board work going? I remember you mentioned advising some firms." Now, sitting in my kitchen at midnight, looking at the research spread across my table and thinking about my son's defeated face, I pulled out my wallet and looked at that number for a long time. Grace would have told me to call. She'd always been better at asking for help, better at understanding that relationships are meant to be used, that there's no nobility in suffering alone when you have resources available. I picked up my phone and typed the number in, then stared at it for another 5 minutes before pressing call. It rang 3 times before Richard answered, his voice alert despite the late hour. "This is Richard?" "Richard, it's Robert Chen. I'm sorry to call so late." A pause, then warmth flooded his voice. "Robert, good God, how long has it been? 2 years? 3? How are you?" "I'm well, thank you. Listen, I know this is out of the blue, but I need to ask you something, and it's not casual." His tone shifted immediately, became focused. "Go ahead." "Are you still on the advisory board at Brightwell Capital?" Another pause, more cautious. "I am. Why do you ask?" "My son works there. Michael Chen. He's a financial analyst in the acquisitions group, or he was until recently." "I see. Tell me more." So I told him, not everything, not the full emotional weight of watching Michael break down over the past weeks, but the facts. The stolen credit on the acquisitions analysis, the reassignment to a diminished role, the performance warning that came 3 days after Michael filed a complaint with HR, the pattern of behavior that suggested systematic abuse rather than isolated incidents. Richard listened without interrupting, which I appreciated. When I finished, there was a long silence. He sat in his smaller office, moved from the window spot he'd earned to an interior cube near the copy machines, and watched his former team move forward on projects he'd started. Michael showed me the pre-approval letter one Sunday, along with listings he'd bookmarked for condos he could no longer afford. "I'd been saving for 2 years," he said, his voice hollow. "Living in a studio apartment that's too small, skipping vacations, being careful with every dollar. And now it's all for nothing. I'm 31 years old, and I'm further from owning a home than I was when I graduated college." I offered to help, to co-sign a loan or provide additional down payment funds, but he refused immediately. "Dad, no. You've worked your whole life, you're retired, you should be enjoying your savings, not bailing out your adult son who can't handle his career. I'm supposed to be independent by now. I'm supposed to be stable. There's no shame in accepting help from family." "Yes, there is. There is when the help is only necessary because I let someone destroy my career. If I'd been smarter, stronger, better at playing corporate politics, I wouldn't be in this position. This is my failure, and I have to deal with it myself." The shame in his voice, the self-blame, that was what hurt most. Michael was internalizing Drake's narrative, believing that his situation was somehow his own fault, that he'd failed rather than been failed by a system that protected the wrong people. We met at the Peacock the next day, a quiet restaurant tucked into a side street in Princeton, the kind of place where businessmen have conversations they don't want overheard. The decor was understated, the lighting dim enough for privacy, the tables spaced far enough apart that neighboring conversations were just murmur. Richard was already there when I arrived, seated at a corner table, looking older than I remembered, but still carrying himself with that quality of assured competence that had always characterized him. Silver-haired now, distinguished in a way that probably opened doors without him needing to speak. He stood when he saw me, and we shook hands firmly the way men of our generation do, communicating respect through grip strength and eye contact. "Robert, you look well." "You too, Richard. Thank you for meeting on such short notice." "Of course. Please sit." We ordered, made small talk while the server was nearby, catching up on the surface details of our lives. His wife was well, traveling extensively. His daughters were successful in their own careers. He asked about Grace, and I explained she'd passed, and he expressed condolences with genuine warmth. Then the server left, and Richard's expression shifted, became businesslike. "Drake's been a concern," he said without preamble. "I'm not the only board member who's noticed. He's aggressive, he's bringing in deals, but there's something off about his judgment. His instincts feel wrong sometimes, like he's playing a short-term game without considering long-term consequences." 13 days later, everything changed. I found out because Michael called me at 6 in the morning, a time he never called unless something was wrong or something was very right. I answered on the second ring, my heart already pounding. "Dad?" His voice was breathless, confused, carrying an edge of something I couldn't quite identify. "Michael, what's wrong?" "I don't know if anything's wrong. I don't know what's happening. I just got to the office early, and Drake's office door is closed, locked. There are people in the conference room, senior partners and some people I don't recognize. Everyone's whispering, and nobody will tell me what's going on. There's talk about an emergency board meeting." An hour later, my phone rang again. "Dad?" Michael's voice was thick with emotion. "They apologized. Officially, formally apologized. They said Drake's behavior was unacceptable, that the way he treated me violated company policy and values. They offered me my old position back, on the acquisitions team." "That's wonderful, son." "It's more than that. They're creating a new senior analyst role, basically a promotion, and they want me to take it. They said I'd be leading a team restructuring, helping rebuild the department after Drake's departure. It's more money, more responsibility, real career advancement, and they're giving me a bonus to compensate for what I lost during the reassignment period. Dad, the number is almost $30,000.
3 months later, Michael invited me to dinner at a restaurant he chose, which told me the occasion was significant. He'd been thriving in his new role, handling major projects with a confidence I hadn't seen in months, mentioned by name in company meetings, respected by colleagues who'd watched him survive Drake's sabotage and come out stronger. The promotion had been everything Brightwell had promised, real responsibility and recognition, and the kind of work that energized rather than depleted him. Over appetizers, he told me he'd made an offer on a condo, a small 2-bedroom place in a neighborhood he loved, with good light and a view of a park. The bonus from Brightwell, plus his accumulated savings, had made the purchase possible, and his new compensation structure meant the mortgage approval was solid. "I'm closing in 3 weeks," he said, grinning. "You'll have to come see it once I'm settled." "I'd love to."
Later that night, alone in my kitchen, I took Richard's phone number out of my wallet and looked at it for a long moment. The paper was worn now, creased from years of being folded and unfolded, handled occasionally just to remember it was there. I didn't throw it away. I put it back in my wallet, folded carefully, a reminder that some resources are meant to be saved for the right moment, that knowing when to use power is as important as having it. I made myself tea, sat at the table where Michael had sat so many defeated evenings, where Grace had served countless family meals, where the history of our lives had accumulated in layers of conversation and silence and shared experience. And I felt something settle in my chest. Not triumph exactly, but something quieter and more sustaining. The satisfaction of knowing that in a world that often rewards the wrong people, that often elevates cruelty and punishes kindness, sometimes careful action and strategic thinking can correct the imbalance. Not because the system is fair, it isn't. Not because justice happens automatically, it doesn't. But because sometimes, when you have resources and relationships and the wisdom to use them properly, you can create conditions where fairness becomes possible, where truth matters again, where good people get the outcomes they deserve. Drake had made a mistake common to men who've never faced real consequences. He'd assumed his position made him invulnerable, that power insulates permanently, that he could hurt people without cost. He'd been wrong about that. And Michael had learned something more valuable than any career victory, that asking for help isn't weakness, that relationships matter, that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is admit you can't do everything alone. Those lessons, forged in difficulty and earned through pain, would serve him well for the rest of his life. I finished my tea, rinsed the cup, turned off the kitchen light. Tomorrow I'd call Michael, just to check in, just to hear his voice and know he was okay. But tonight I let myself feel the simple contentment of knowing I'd done what fathers are meant to do, protected my child when he needed protecting, in whatever way I could. Grace would have been proud, I think. And that, more than anything else, made the whole complicated mess worthwhile. If this emotional story resonated with you, if you've ever had to advocate for someone you love, or wished someone would stand up for you when things seemed impossible, I'd love to hear about it in the comments below. Share your experiences with workplace challenges, with family support, with those moments when someone's quiet intervention changed everything. And if you found value in this real-life story about integrity, patience, and the power of strategic kindness, please consider subscribing to this channel. We share stories like this regularly, true accounts of ordinary people navigating extraordinary situations, finding dignity in difficult circumstances, and discovering that sometimes the most powerful moves are the ones nobody sees coming. Hit that like button if this story moved you, and turn on notifications so you never miss new content. Because everyone deserves to know that when the system fails, when power protects the wrong people, sometimes all it takes is one person who cares enough to find another way. Thanks for watching, and remember, asking for help isn't weakness, it's wisdom.